against Federer in the longest single Wimbledon final in history, where England won the World Cup, and then you came and joined us here for what was then a most invigorating conversation. But the world has changed. COVID, Ukraine, a lot of instability. And you've just, as the High Commissioner said, just come back from Davos. So I wanted to know, what's the mood like in India and about the world from your vantage point?
Thank you. Should I call you Professor Manoj?
Okay.
Shameless. Where do you teach, man?
My daughter said you don't want me to teach that.
But that's good to know, and I'm being interviewed by a professor after many, many years. I think there's a big difference between the mood in India and the mood in the rest of the world. In India, there's a lot of excitement about the future. Our young India is looking at the future with great hope, great aspiration, great confidence, and great commitment to bring prosperity to 1.4 billion people. Davos, unfortunately, when you look at the macro picture, represented quite a bit of doom and gloom. I thought most of the panels, most of the engagements, multilateral, in larger groups, showed that participants were very, very disturbed, concerned, slightly pessimistic about the future of multilateralism, already talking about deglobalization, looking at a new world with a completely pessimistic lens. In fact, at one of the forums where we had all the world leading economists, for almost an hour I kept hearing everybody predicting different scenarios. And almost towards the end, I couldn't resist but stand up and say, look, I think we are panicking. The world has not come to an end. Challenges all of us have faced all our lives. I don't know anybody in this room who's had a cakewalk. And we overcome challenges, we fight the situation. And I think personally, I shared with the very, very eminent group that we in India look at the future with great optimism. We believe these things will also pass, as have many other challenges. I recall 2 years ago, COVID had almost taken our total mind space. Today, I don't see a single person with a mask. I saw one.
High Commissioner.
Sorry, I didn't realize. Apologies. But it's good you're being cautious because I do need to get back and file my nomination if the party does decide to re-nominate me.
Sure they will.
And I promise you, after the engagement got over, almost everybody in the room came individually to talk to me and thank me and say you were good and this is what we needed to do. And that's the mood in it. We believe we have a set of very, very bright young boys and girls coming up with innovative solutions to the problems of mankind or even of society on a day-to-day basis. Brilliant ideas and a lot of confidence that they can do much better than what our forefathers or our parents did or our grandparents. I think whenever Karan would have come in and started his work, he must have had the same kind of enthusiasm, the same kind of will-do spirit that we see in every young child in the country. And I can assure you that you have a country which is just daring to go, a set of people who can see the change over the last few years in the way things work in India, seeing opportunities and wanting to grab every single opportunity that comes their way. So I personally believe, and my bilaterals, I had over 50 bilaterals with business leaders, ministers, world leaders. Almost every one of them I came back extremely excited. You talk to an IBM, they're talking of adding 15,000 employees in India every single year. You talk to a Micron, they want to add jobs, they want to expand their R&D center in the next 3 to 4 years, double the jobs in the R&D activities. And ministers, literally every one of them wanting to talk about an FTA. Every minister coming to you and saying that we'd like to discuss a potential free trade agreement, that I had to actually tell many colleague ministers that we have no more bandwidth. I have officers who work on one FTA in the morning, another at night. I used to be up at 1:30 in the night talking to my counterpart in Australia, trying to close the transaction, one of the fastest FTA, probably second only to the UAE, which also was done by the movie company. 88 days we settled a whole free trade agreement. And it calls for relentless work, study, research, focused engagement with the stakeholders. And I'm happy to share with you that the people of India, businesses in India, are tremendously excited about this opening up, that they see the fact that today India wants to engage with the world, not be an inward-looking India. We want to engage with the world from a position of strength, from a position where we are not some country which can be pushed along or pushed aside. It's a country that is a demander rather than somebody who's just protecting his turf. And that's the India that I see before me, and I'm really proud to be a part.
We'll come back to FTAs, but there's one particular quote that really went viral on social media whilst you were in Davos, and that's when you said, when you invest in India, you invest in the India story. Could you just elaborate further on what you meant by that?
Well, I think the change that we see in India today is the fact that businesses and wealth creators are respected. And by that, I'd just like to add a caveat to that. Honest wealth creators are finally being respected. Today, a young person coming out of college is not necessarily running to get a government job. He has an entrepreneurial spirit, which is being recognized by the government, which is being recognized by society, which is being recognized by his own parents, who are willing to let him explore new avenues. Today, India is focused on bringing ease of doing business so that every person's life becomes easier, ultimately leading to ease of living. Structural change at every level in government, in the way the social fabric thinks, in the way education is being promoted, our healthcare facilities, the combination of providing for the poor, giving them a better life for the future, and creating a foundation of a very modern, developed India, both going simultaneously, so that nobody feels left behind. It's a very inclusive growth story that we are seeing in India, and that's the difference from the past. I mean, imagine there was a time when Hindi movie songs in the films used to depict our sisters, our mothers, our daughters going out to the fields before sunrise with a beautiful song. And that was the image of India that was sought to be highlighted and shown to the world. I sometimes, if somebody was to ask me what is the single most important program of your government, what do you feel most happy about? What gives you the biggest satisfaction? I think it's the fact that we provided 120 million homes. with a toilet. And is that a place of respect, as we call it? Because the dignity of our women, the dignity of our daughters was at stake and for 70 years. Nobody thought of that. Nobody ever realized, even amongst the men, that there's something shameful, something not good about it. I think that's the difference. The empathy towards the marginalized sections of society. The fact that we care for every single person, rich or poor, big or small, the middle class, a professional, an educated and uneducated, a street vendor. Every section is in the focus of the government's plans and agenda, and that's what excites you to want to work more and aspire.
You also you've talked about limitless potential, limitless talent of India, and Prime Minister Modi has also spoken frequently about this. But surely you would be seeing some hurdles along the way to what Prime Minister Modi has called the Amrit Kal, or that era of that golden era that is emerging. What are the hurdles you're seeing along the way?
And I think black swan events will keep happening, probably at greater frequency than in the past. The COVID pandemic was something none of us expected, a once in a century situation. The war, we've been hearing about this conflict for so many years that everybody had almost started disbelieving that there could be war. I remember the foreign ministry sending out advisories to all our children in Ukraine that please leave and come back. We added additional flights which would come back empty, because the children there were being convinced by the professors in the medical colleges where most of them were studying that there's nothing wrong, you better go and watch a ballet or a show. Everything is normal. These things have been talked about for years. But it happened, and look at where it has taken the world to, the kind of inflation, the kind of food insecurity, kind of challenges before the world. So whether it's COVID, whether it's this conflict, whether other challenges which may emerge in the future, it could be challenges. But I think that's what we are all in it for. There were no challenges. I think everybody would be a billionaire. Everybody would be doing extremely well, and because then there would be no need for politicians.
So you mentioned black swan events as being the ones that the curveball that comes in, one has to deal with. Ukraine is obviously one of them, and that's where India has come out with some criticism. And I'm not going to talk about politics, but more something related to your portfolio, and that is the ban on wheat. And in this part of the world, the cost of living crisis is something that's really biting, and Europe is not going to be insulated, it's around the world. I want you to specifically talk us through this particular issue.
I'm glad you asked that question. And of course, inflation bites everything all across the world. Commodity prices have been at an all-time high for several months now. Food inflation is hurting India and Indians too. And clearly, there are challenges before every country. Wheat is a very, very unique challenge which I think nobody in the world had ever imagined to take such proportions. But I'd like you to reflect on the India wheat story. Until a few years ago, and not in the very distant past, India was not a very big producer of wheat. We started increasing our wheat production more in the last 8 to 10 years. But at the same time, with prosperity, with rising incomes, with massive national food security program through which we would give 800 million of our brothers and sisters ration or food grain at very, very concessional price, almost for free. And wheat was being given for 2 Indian rupees a kilo to 800 million Indians. And therefore there was greater cultivation. Yet, until 2 years ago, India was not exporting any wheat. We were consuming what we were producing. And we were keeping a certain amount as our food security buffer. It's only 2 years ago that we had a little surplus wheat, so we exported 2 million tons. Ladies and gentlemen, 2 million tons is 1% of global wheat trade. 1%. Last year, and our year ends in March, as most of you would remember. Last year also we would have been at maybe 2, maybe 3 million tons. But since January, February, March, the period when people saw that there were problems and the wheat prices started rising, first the potential and then the actual problem. We saw wheat exports increase and it closed the year of March with 7 million tons. Still talking 3% of the world's production, world's food trade. And we allowed it to happen. We were happy, we would have encouraged it. And I'm on record telling my wheat producers, wheat traders and exporters that please procure as much wheat as you can and export it and help whichever countries require wheat. In fact, April and the first 10 days of May, 40 days, we saw another 2 million tons of wheat. And we were reasonably okay. Around that time, the news came that the heat wave, which had struck large parts of northern India, has damaged the wheat crop significantly. Wheat, if harvested early, which we had to do because of the heat wave, gets shriveled. And the estimates of wheat production, which were expected to be 111 million tons, which would have left us with about 7-8 million tons of surplus wheat, because our consumption in the country is anywhere between 100 and 105 million tons. So we thought we'll have a good 7-8 million tons. If necessary, we'll even take out some stocks from our food stocks, should be WTO permitted. And we'll support the world, particularly considering the crisis, wherever we can. But that could still have at best gone to about 10 million tons, and we thought it would happen over the course of it. But the data that came for 40 days showed that we had already exported 2 million tons in 40 days, which was a 6x growth, 6 times growth of what we did in the same 40 days last year. Now, on the one hand, production estimates are falling, and the most recent estimate was 105 million tons at that point of time. Currently, what's coming out from the marketplaces, it could be even slightly lower than that. The public procurement, which is normally 43 to 45 million tons, has fallen to only 18 million. 43 to 45 has fallen to 18 million tons is the stock that I got as the food minister for my public stockholding of food security requirements. So I'm 25 million tons down in my own stock in the godowns, which in fact validates the theory that production is certainly down this year. And it is in this background, when I started getting into the details of the export, I found last year, most of the wheat had gone to Bangladesh and other less developed countries. This time around, in the 40-day period, most of the wheat was headed to UAE and Singapore, both of which have small 8 million population. So certainly they were not the guys who were buying. Somebody was stocking, somebody was hoarding that wheat. Probably it was speculative purposes or to make a big buck at a future date, which is not going to help anybody in the world. And therefore, to curb that kind of speculative hoarding and wheat going into a few hands, to ensure that those who deserve it or those who need it most, particularly the less developed countries. So in the future, a country like UK or any European country would be able to afford to get wheat. They'll be able to get it from their friends, the larger producers like Australia, maybe other countries. But no, the less developed countries always look up to a friend like India. And therefore, while planning the wheat also, we have said in the regulation that government-to-government contracts, wherever we can help less developed or vulnerable countries or poor countries, India will, out of the stocks that we have, We're ready and willing to support them. We've asked the WTO to allow us to do G2G contracts out of our public stock holding stocks, which is forbidden by WTO, unfortunately, thanks to a very, very terrible agreement made in the Uruguay round some 35 years ago, where less developed countries and developing world was badly discriminated against in the agricultural subsidies and the restrictions that were put around that. I hope the WTO listens and I hope the WTO relents on this very unfair and discriminatory treatment given to the less developed and developing world in WTO.
I think, thank you ever so much for that elaborate response. And not only have you been able to give a very clear answer on the wheat issue, but I think friends here would also appreciate that it gives us an insight into the policy attitude of the government of India across the board as well, with this particular response that you've given, Minister. I now want to turn to trade deals. India historically has not been known to sign many, many trade deals, and then suddenly you saw this turbocharged approach to negotiating trade deals. The UAE and Australia in record succession. And if you don't mind me saying, there have been many watchers of India that were not only surprised at India, but were surprised by the BJP of all parties to be so aggressive when it's come to free trade negotiate or pursuing free trade deals. Could you elaborate a bit more on what your strategy and thinking behind this new approach is?
I think no country in the world has really prospered and brought prosperity to their people without engaging in international trade, engaging with the world. Every country has its own comparative strengths, the old David Ricardo theory. And we have our comparative advantages in many areas. Other countries have a lot to offer us in different areas. And the more we work in the globalized world, amongst friends, trusted partners, people who believe in transparency, the rule of law, ideally democracies, the more I think India and Indian people will be able to get jobs, grow, prosper. We always believed in it. The BJP traditionally, right from the days of the Chand San, and I'm talking the 50s, has opposed the kind of policies India adopted since independence. The public sector culture that everything the government will do, everything will be decided by the government, licensing. We opposed the licensing Raj always. When we came into government in 2014, Indian story was not a very well recognized or respected story. Today you have the challenge of COVID. At that time we had the challenge of addressing things like corruption. We had the challenge of a fragile five economy which we inherited. Weak in foreign currency reserves, exports not growing for long, the country not rated very highly by other nations. And in that situation, if you were to try and do trade deals, like we had done earlier in the 2009, 10, 11 period, you would do it from a position of weakness. And therefore, you would be giving up more than what you want. So it could never be a win-win. You would be on the defensive while doing this. Also, we needed to create the structural framework, better infrastructure, lower logistics costs, self-confidence in our businesses, which comes through engagement and talking to them about what's good or bad for them, taking them along in your FTA negotiations so that they are stakeholders, their concerns are addressed, the opportunities that they desire to get are also brought into the agreement. And therefore, we felt the right time would be that once we have sorted out our own internal problems, and domestically we have a stronger footing in our manufacturing base, in our services base, that would be the right time to start looking at these things. As many of you may be aware, last year we did a record in terms of our export of goods, $420 billion, never before, exceeding our targets. Targets already were high and most people didn't believe it, whereas then Prime Minister set that target. Services significantly exceeding our target, reaching $254 billion without travel, without tourism, without hospitality, thanks to COVID. Both of which give us the confidence that India is now ready to work with the world from a position of strength. Simultaneously, the deep effort Prime Minister Modi has made on building up the infrastructure in India, strengthening institutions, regulatory processes, our various government bodies, streamlining processes to decriminalize laws, reduce the compliance burden. All of this put together give us the courage of the confidence that India is now ready to work with the world, looking at more open trading without borders with the developed world, with whom I think there's synergy, there's less competition, more collaboration. And in that spirit, we started talking to countries. Our approach has been that we are very upfront, very honest in our constraints, yet willing to be sensitive to the concerns of the other country. And with that mutual trust and respect, we were able to get 2 deals done very fast. Canada is progressing well for an early harvest agreement. With the UK, we had agreed to do an early harvest agreement. The early harvest basically means you grab whatever are the low-hanging fruits, take the positive so that we leave the more difficult elements for the next stage, but give the business world, give the people of both countries the confidence that yes, this agreement is a win-win. It's good for both. And then there'll be an automatic demand for more. But the way things are progressing, it actually land up doing a full FTA with UK by demand. And I had very good meetings this afternoon.
And that's the question I was going to come on to. Looking carefully at our 2 chief negotiators across there, they're both poker-faced and very focused on that. But do you really think that it's achievable to sign a full-fledged FTA by Manoj? And what are the points of contention?
Professor Manoj, if there were no points of contention, the India-EU FTA would have happened in 2008.
Okay.
That's about how long they've been working on. Obviously, there are difficulties. Many times the difficulties also come from sensitivities. The ability to understand where each one is and where each one will be in the future. After all, a free trade agreement is not something you're doing for 1 or 2 or 5 years. You're actually writing out the destiny of your trading relations between 2 nations for the next 30 or 50 years. Particularly in this current world, where there's so much dichotomy between countries, there's so much distrust, particularly when we are dealing with countries that don't have democratic systems. One of which is at war, one of which has completely messed up supply chains all over the world. The world has realized that you would rather work with a trusted partner like India, who even through the COVID period, in the peak of the pandemic, met every international commitment that we had. Not for a second did anybody who had signed up a contract with India for goods or services have to worry that India will fail to deliver. Think about it. Anybody who had research going on in India, anybody who had back offices in India, call centers in India, or had his software being prepared in India, or had his data in India, not a single person had to complain for a second because we quickly rejigged our processes. Prime Minister had launched Digital India in 2015. That helped us and helped us remain in good shape that we could take broadband to people's homes overnight, move equipment to homes and literally working from home. Not for a second, there was no downtime in our performance. That has earned us the sobriquet of a trusted partner. And when you do a trade deal, you're actually crystal gazing into a 30, 50-year future. So therefore, you have to be very careful. I can't afford to make a mistake. If I make a mistake, I'm actually mortgaging my child and my grandchild's future. So therefore, everybody has to be very cautious. Every paper goes through 5 hands. Research is a continuous process. Modeling has to be done on what will happen in different scenarios. I will give you a simple case in point. And I shared it today with several stakeholders, Professor, I'm getting confused between Professor and Doctor and Lord. Lord Bilimoria was there in one of the engagements where I shared with illustrious.
We have a Lord Desai here. Lord Desai, please
come up front.
Come to the front. We are going to come to, after one more question, we're going to come to the audience. So just bear with us.
So Lord Desai is smarter than all of us. He comes at the right time. As a normal
You're not getting over my profession.
What happens is when you come to London, after having seen so many videos of other engagements and interviews in London, you also get disoriented. But anyway, I was in fact thinking of pausing for a minute or two for one of your questions. So that I would at least elicit a response from the audience.
We'll come to the audience in a few moments. Okay, I want you to promise something, or can you promise something, that you're not going to sign a free trade agreement with the European Union before you sign one. Promises that.
I'm sure the two negotiators are doing wonderful work. We'll have put out. But in an earlier engagement today, I was sharing a thought with Lord Bilimoria and his other colleagues, and I opened it up for all of you to reflect upon. Look at the very vastly different economies that are looking at an agreement with each other. You have on the one hand a country with 1.4 billion people aspiring for growth, aspiring for prosperity, a better quality of life. And on the other hand, a country of maybe 65 million people. 60 million people. So about 4% of India's population. I'm just trying to show you a glimpse of the market size. The two markets. Point 2. You have a country where the per capita income is only $2,000. So farmers, a lot of people in the early stages of development, the lower middle class, several who are still to come out of poverty get a chance to make it in life. All of them today connected with smartphones, internet, television, seeing what's out there in the world. And that's driving them to look at a better future, to grow, to work hard. Look at the demographic dividend. A country which is one of the youngest in the world, probably the youngest. Look at the advantages of that demographic dividend. I was just doing some modeling in the course of our discussions of where the UK economy will be, let's say 30 years from now. You're a $3 trillion economy, we are a little under $3 trillion. You've seen the growth over the last many years. You can project, you can crystal gaze and do a little bit of math and see where the UK economy will be. And my own guess is, and of course, Lord Meghnad Desai is far more equipped to answer that than anybody else here, that probably 30 years from now, you'll see an economy which should be 2x of what it is now, at best 3x of what it is now. India, one of the fastest growing economies of the world, meeting the aspirations of 1.4 billion people. And I'm broadly imagining that it'll flatten out. Our population will flatten out. The most recent family health survey says fertility rate is down to 2, which is good news. But even growing at a modest 8% every year, And I look at that as modest because that's about where we were before the pandemic. That's where the IMF is projecting us to be now. Personally, if you ask me, I see no reason, given the policies, given the structural improvements, given all the effort we've done for the banking system, for decriminalization, for reduction of compliance burden, for ease of doing business, the work that our people are putting in, I see no reason India shouldn't aspire to grow in double digits. But even granted that I look at 8% as the growth rate, we'll be doubling every 9 years. And in the next 30 years, we would be 10x from where we are now, if not more. Now, that's the opportunities that we offer each other. And it is in this context that I talked to business persons this afternoon to reflect on what would be a fair and equitable agreement. And if the context gets better understood, and that is what was understood well in UAE or in Australia, which is why we were able to close fast. And by the way, you know how press is in all of these countries, whether it's Australia, whether it's India more than anybody else, whether it's the UAE, press can be very, very demanding, very tough on you. But I dare say in all three countries, there was not a single editorial, not a single sectoral group, industry group, farmer group who found fault with the FTA, who objected to it, who criticized it, or was able to pick holes in it. Not one article. And I must thank my officials for the wonderful work they had done in stakeholder consultation and the extensive homework that went into getting a fair deal and a win-win for both countries.
Okay. We're going to take a pause so you can catch your breath, and we're going to come to some questions from the floor in a moment. But what we wanted to do now is to just reveal the shortlist for our 4th UK India Awards. Piyush attended the first UK India Awards, where Boris Johnson, who was then Foreign Secretary, also attended. So we're in our 4th edition of these awards. So we're going to play a short video. No, we can just say it across here, where we're going to play a short video revealing the nominees for this year.
The UK India Awards are the exclusive annual gathering celebrating the winning partnership between the UK and India. Join a star-studded cast of VIP guests, celebrities, and influential figures from business, politics, media, and entertainment. Please join us in congratulating the 2022 UK India Awards shortlist across the 8 key awards categories. Shortlisted for Investment of the Year are Reliance Industries Limited, Bharti Group, SR Group. Shortlisted for New Market Entrant of the Year are Tide Business, Serum Institute of India, Ola Electric Mobility. Shortlisted for Business Promotion Organisation of the Year are Confederation of British Industry, Department for International Trade, Venture Capital Unit, Manchester India Partnership, West Midlands India Partnership, Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry UK. Shortlisted for Legal Practice of the Year are Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, Bird and Bird LLP, Linklaters, Pennington Manches Cooper LLP, Freshfields Brockhouse Derringer LLP. Shortlisted for Financial Services Organisation of the Year are Deutsche Bank, ICICI Bank, Oak North Bank, State Bank of India. Shortlisted for Technology Company of the Year are Prodapt, Tech Mahindra, HCL Technologies. Shortlisted for Consultancy of the Year are EY, Grant Thornton UK LLP, Sunham S4 Group, Moore Kingston Smith. And last but not least, shortlisted for Social Impact Project of the Year are the British Asian Trust, British Telecom Group, Sewa UK, the Akshaya Patra Foundation, India Global Forum celebrates and congratulates all the shortlisted organizations and thanks the 2022 awards jury. And the winners are... Join us with our 2022 host, Rory Bremner, in the splendid surroundings of the Fairmont Windsor Park on Friday, the 1st of July, 2022, to find out. Book your table now at www.indiaglobalforum.com and join us for what promises to again be a star-studded, entertaining and glamorous evening.
And many of the shortlisted nominees are here with us, and we're looking forward to celebrating the great UK-India partnership on the 1st of July. It is the biggest and best party in town. Whoever's been there in the past will know. And we've got Rory Bremner, who is absolutely fantastic. So please do join us. Now to some questions from the floor. The Minister has kindly agreed to take some questions. We have about 10 minutes. And I'm going to be really biased. So if there are any women, they're going to get the first shot at it, but otherwise open to everybody else. So some questions from the floor. I'm going to try and avoid journalists, but...
No, I have no problem.
You don't have a problem. Okay.
I don't have a problem.
Aditi Khanna.
Thank you. Thank you. Minister Aditi from Press Trust of India. You mentioned you had great interactions. Could you tell us a little bit more? And specifically on defense technology, we keep hearing there are things happening. So if you can just share what's happening.
I think the whole world realizes that India is a big marketplace. India is a safe place to work with in terms of manufacturing and defense equipment, particularly because we do not insist on technology transfer. We even allow coveted technologies to be owned fully, 100% by foreign investors. There is a lot of interest in companies around the world to look at manufacturing in defense in India. Davos is not really a forum where you are literally looking at sectoral investments or talking to a company and trying to do an MOU. You know, some reports came out of MOUs being signed at Davos and all. That's not Davos. Davos is a confidence building forum. Davos is about engaging with people to get a flavor of what's happening in the world and where people are looking at what are the destinations that people are seriously considering for their future plans. And they are judging us to see whether you are good enough for their future plans. And I think defense, of course, will be a very natural potential investment of opportunity in India, given our large spending on defense and given also the fact that we opened our doors now to invite more and more companies to come and manufacture in India. In fact, in one of the engagements this afternoon also, an interest was shown by British companies who would like to come and invest in India, and they were keen to discuss that further.
Okay, good. And of course, on the 27th of June, we have the UK-India Defence Technology Summit as part of our UK-India Week, where Jeremy Quinn, the UK Defence Minister, will be there in person. So you'll get some more insights there. Utkarsh Amitabh, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Minister, for your question. I'm a Shrievening Fellow at Oxford and the CEO of a company called Network Capital. I wanted to ask, when it comes to the tech sector or the startup sector, is there a dichotomy when we think of, say, building for India or building for the world? Because I've sat in some of the discussions with you, say, about the e-commerce policy, and, you know, the discussions do have multiple points of view with MNCs saying something and India emerging as a dominant force. I was wondering, from your standpoint, how do you balance and what are your mental models to take appropriate decisions?
Frankly, ultimately, the world is getting closer and closer, save and except the current blip that we are seeing. And building for India need not be any different from building for the world. today India is a demander of very high quality stuff. So we don't believe that if you're building for India, the standards need to be any different from what you would do if you were to build for the world. But India becomes a nice template, a nice fertile ground to experiment, to work with at lower cost than what you would do if you were to immediately start your offerings in maybe Europe for that matter, or UK. So I think it's important that all our startup entrepreneurs recognize that when they're coming up with new ideas, new innovations, they should be prepared to be able to take it to the rest of the world. A lot of our entrepreneurs today are making their presence felt worldwide, whether in the field of fintech or edtech or health tech. Maybe not agri-tech so much as yet, but I won't be surprised that going forward, given the fact that our Indian agriculture works in very, very constrained circumstances, very difficult circumstances, with the fragmentation of land, very small land holdings, very often dependence on the vagaries of nature. In all those difficulties, this kind of innovative solutions that are coming up, be it organic farming, be it better use of technology or drip irrigation or energy efficient ways of getting it produced, multi-cropping, cash crops, the fact that of late our farmers have started also working on natural farming. All of this gives them a premium and an opportunity to take their offerings to the rest of the world. And our startups are acting like a bridge for these products to become global. So I think startups or technologies being developed in India will not only serve India, but will serve the world. UPI is a very great example, the India stack on financial services, which can become the future payment system of the world and the lowest cost payment system. And nobody has been able to do anything better than that. The UAE, in fact, wanted to duplicate it. They came out with a expression of interest, but they couldn't get anybody to provide them an offering as good as that. They actually had to abort it and are now talking to us to see if we can work together, taking UPI to UAE. And I think that will be a great offering for the whole world to use in terms of its sheer power and flexibility and affordability. Similarly, we are coming up with an open network for digital commerce, which will democratize e-commerce and make your mom and pop stores also relevant and probably give them a chance to survive in this, I don't want to call it any adjective, so I think I'll refrain, in this world of, let's say, big tech, without an adjective.
Excellent. We've got a chance for a couple of more questions. Radhika, Barry, and then Srini. Okay.
Thank you. Good evening. You said that inflation is biting all of us. Very true. Is that having some sort of an impact on the negotiations that are happening on the FTAs? And will there be some sort of a, are you hoping that an FTA, whenever, if and when it's announced in October, will have some sort of a negative effect on rising costs? Thank you.
No, frankly, a free trade agreement should only help us to reduce costs. Because when we open the borders, you're able to have an exchange of goods and services, and the best quality at the lowest price wins. So you are in fact giving more opportunity for trade to grow. And if at all an FTA helps, it helps to bring down costs, not add to cost. Point one. Point two, as I said earlier, an FTA is not for an immediate solution to a problem that you're faced with today. An FTA is addressing concerns for the long term. Obviously, if it's good, it should start having an impact even today and should help. And that's what we are aiming for, an agreement which will be good for the people of the United Kingdom and India, which will be good for businesses in the United Kingdom and India, and fair and equitable in terms of the different size and type of economies that are working to put this together. In terms of inflation, it does have concerns for every country, particularly for the spiraling impact it has and how it can eat into your future growth. you start with inflation, then you're looking at fiscal policy or interest rate hikes leading to possibly some kind of flight of capital or lower appetite for investments, fresh investments. Sometimes, or rather almost all times, leading to currency depreciation and its impact then towards growth. So I think it's a very, very downward spiral, and therefore all countries, and particularly India this time around, is looking at both fiscal and monetary policy. Government is equally proactive in its various steps so that we can nip it in the bud.
The Honourable Barry Gardiner, MP. One of the key announcements at COP26 last year was when Prime Minister Modi and our own Prime Minister spoke of developing a global green grid and the export of sunlight in the form of electricity from India to the rest of the world. But seeing this come to pass is another matter. The announcement is great. What are the key pragmatic problems that the project may face, and how is it developing?
Well, this was a thought which Prime Minister had articulated, if I remember correctly, somewhere in 2007 or 8. I'm just sharing this with you because it just shows you the kind of vision that he's always had and the big picture thinking that he developed at a very early stage of his active administrative role, first as Chief Minister of Gujarat, and of course now for 8 years. And on the 31st, barely 2 days from now, we'll be completing our 8th year in office. Actually, today is the 26th.
Yes.
So in a manner of speaking, I'm sorry, today we complete
the first day
8 years of government. Because the first term was started on the 26th of May 2014. And yes, High Commissioner, Her Excellency Gayatri was in the President's house. And I was coordinating a lot of the swearing in arrangements in the sweltering heat with them, and of course jostling for passes and all of that. You were there too, Manoj.
No, I came back to the UK, but
okay.
I missed that. But, yes.
And so really, it's very nice that you've got all of us together. It is the 8th anniversary of our government today.
So it's a celebration as well.
And in that sense, your idea or the point that you just made is something that he's been kind of crafting in his mind, which he articulated at COP26 in little greater detail. We have already started talking to other nations. For example, the Omani's minister and the UAE minister. We've both been talking to each other because there's a time difference of about an hour and a half. And the distance is not too long. We could actually support each other with solar power during peak hours, where currently it's no good for India. It could help these countries in the Middle East and in their regions, where in fact the radiation is much higher. Power could be generated at times which could help India in its peak load requirement. And the idea is truly path-breaking. It'll need transmission lines, undersea transmission lines, which are not impossible. We've seen the telecom industry do that. We've seen optic fiber being laid out. We've seen a lot of cost competitiveness come into that in recent times. It'll need a lot of engagement between governments. It'll need some more like-minded or very, very bold corporations, because ultimately it'll have to be led by the private sector, but supported by regulatory changes by the governments. So I think it's still early stages. There's a lot of work to be done, but I do believe at some stage we would see this happening. It'll need a more cordial and a more conducive world environment without conflict to be able to do it. A lot of the Central Asian countries have large tracts of land with low population. who could also participate and actually have a very impactful contribution. But again, we have neighbors in our country through which such cables would have to pass. So another challenge before any such initiative. But I think challenges are always going to be there. We have to work around those challenges.
And final one question from Srinivasa Rao. Here you are. There's Chloe.
Minister, Sir, Srini Rao from Ernst & Young. I can only say kudos, and more kudos for the manner in which you have brought FTAs to the fore. I was fortunate to be present with Manoj when you were about to ink the UAE FTA. And in my 30 years or more working with India, I've very rarely seen the kind of energy, dynamism, and action orientation that you brought to the table in bringing that FTA to a close. So very many kudos to you overall. Just for a minute, stepping back and looking at the government as one canvas, we have a very bold and strong legislature, and I think there's a litany of evidence about the bold transformation bills and acts that have been introduced in Parliament. Arguably a world-class executive that is delivering to the vision of the legislature at great speed, intensity, and intelligence. The only pebble in the shoe that I've heard some international investors express is the judicial system and the pace and the velocity and the metabolism of the judicial system in terms of resolving issues at speed. And I know the facts well, the number of cases. And this is not for a moment, sir, to speak about our judges who many, and you know well, some of our judges and the jurisprudence coming out of India are quoted across the planet. The quality of intellect is unquestionable, but how do we lighten the weight of the judicial system so that we can keep a fleet-footed pace with implementing business transformation?
I think this is the silent moment that I was hoping for. It's better to keep my mouth zipped and pretend I didn't understand the question. Every word can get me into trouble. But,
Go on.
I can only say this, that I do appreciate what you're saying, that very often justice in India does get delayed. We had Rajan Bharti Mittal in the room, and that's a case in point, the telecom industry having to pay large amounts due to a very long-awaited or long-drawn case that went on for many years, probably a decade, I think, the AGR case, finally leading to so much stress in the system. Of course, the other viewpoint is if they had not contested it, because unfortunately the documents reflected that they would have had to pay and paid it 10 years back, they wouldn't have had to face the stress that they had to when they finally were called upon to pay it with interest and penalty and all of that. It's certainly an area of concern. We've tried to bring in we've tried to bring in arbitration and respect arbitration. You saw that we, in deference to a similar case about which you are all aware, in fact, finally changed the law, which was not of our doing. We had inherited it. In fact, then Finance Minister, the illustrious Mr. Arun Jaitley, is on record in Parliament, and I believe Mr. Modi himself also is on record, to commit to the world that our government and India in the future will not do retrospective amendments in the law. But that was a legacy issue. It was an issue where one had to tread carefully until all the judicial remedies were exhausted. If we had rushed into doing it too fast, it could have had significant political backlash. So it did take time, but I'm glad that that's behind us. Sent a very good signal, I believe, across the world. We are working with senior judicial officers, our very, very highly esteemed judges, to see what we can do for faster appointment. And you will be happy to know that currently the Supreme Court is seeing almost full strength. And we are trying to take that to the high courts and trying to ensure that appointments get speeded up and judiciary is full up, available for taking decisions. We are focusing more and more and trying to get arbitration in the system. We've already approved the commercial courts for disputes of a commercial nature. Hopefully that will fast track it. Lok adalats, where we try to dispose of smaller and easier cases in bulk and faster, are the order of the day. We are looking at mediation also being promoted in the days to come. There's already a dialogue and public discussion going on that. So we are very seized of that situation, very concerned. And it's not only us or businesses. The judges themselves are also concerned about it. And I can assure you they're equally responsive and wanting to improve things. Current Chief Justice is on record about his angst on this issue. The incoming Chief Justices also, many of whom in their various judgments in the bar, have asked all stakeholders, which includes government and the judiciary, to see what steps can be taken. But certainly an area where it's work in progress, we'll have to do a lot more. I respect that. And I wish you and all the other potential winners of the award my best wishes for the final 1st July announcement.
Thank you ever so much. I'm sure everybody in the room agrees that the minister has certainly earned his supper. And so please give him a very, very big round of applause. Friends, I just wanted to thank you all for coming, and it gives us great encouragement for the UK-India week that we've been able to pack this room. I'm going to have to go back to our team to say we may need to look at bigger venues for the week of the 27th of June. Please do join us. India Global Forum is a conversation, and you've witnessed one, I hope, cracking conversation with the minister.
By the way, that word conversation is a little dangerous. It's a word being used in a different context and misused also, because I don't know, everything is being sought to be converted into the fact that India needs conversations.
And we've had
I think India needs action and India needs good governance. That's what is a better...
Aditi, you've got your headline. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
How's Norton?